actions and resources could advance the development of a regional resilience strategy?
So my answer here is twofold, and it's kind of a high level combined with an action level on the ground. And normally I'm all for, like, let's just do it and we can talk later. But I think given the scale of the region and the complexity of the number of stakeholders, we actually need time to bring some of the key folks from across the region together to come up with a consolidated vision, and that's going to take a little patience, and that will take a little bit of time. But we need more than talk. I think we've got a great baseline of studies and so on. So how can we simultaneously jump into some action where we've already identified things need to be done? There's been studies. There's been lots of areas of opportunity already identified. And so where can we find some quick wins to learn from and to build on and to create a sense of momentum? And so we've identified a handful of those. There's a whole need for extreme weather mapping and to look at what areas are most prone to overland flooding. And I know the Conservation Authority is doing a lot of work in this regard. We need better risk assessment tools that help understand our readiness for, and how do we get them ready for widespread adaptation. There's a number of homeowner incentives, and I think the Insurance Bureau of Canada is doing some really innovative work in this regard. We have done in the past green home energy audits. We're now getting into flood audits before you can buy a house. And so what are some of the basic things that homeowners can do to protect their own homes from the risks of flooding, from water coming up the drain, from water coming up the in the windows? And I think a lot of these strategies are ready. They need to kind of harness onto something. And this really connects to conversations about building code and retrofit guidelines. So I think we're looking at kind of a meta-level mapping while we're trying to push on some of the areas that are, quite frankly, ready to go.
Thanks, Shauna. Our next question is for Patricia. Patricia, how do resilience indicators relate to other measurements of sustainable communities that the Global City Centre has developed or promoted?
So in 2 minutes or less, there's a lot of indicators out there. We developed the first 100 indicators around ISO 37120. That meant writing definitions, methodologies, making sure the numerator and the denominator, commonalities across all cities worldwide. But in the process of taking it through ISO 37120 was put out for international ballot. It's it's a very bureaucratic process in the ISO, if any of you've been exposed to it. We went out for several ballots. In the process, which is really interesting for this evening's discussion, every time we put ISO 37120 out for ballot, there were every country that voted, with many cities in their local mirror committees, every single one asked for more indicators on resilient cities. So we ended up compromising within ISO and said, we're not going to go over 100 indicators. There's no city willing to report on more than 100 indicators, so we cut it at 100. And we opened a Dropbox for indicators on resilient cities in ISO. Within 1 month, we had 690 indicators in the Dropbox from all these member countries. So what do we prioritize to measure? How do we start to prepare? We ended up doing a TR, an ISO 37121 technical report on inventory for indicators on resilient cities. And that's just out for ballot now, being published. And as a result of all of that, we've been asked now to develop a brand new ISO standard for establishing indicators for resilient cities. So we're working with BOMA, who's here, John Smiglis, on the building side of that, so that we can think of indicators for buildings in cities, for infrastructure in cities, preparedness, recovery time, etc. And we're partnering with UNISDR out of Geneva, which is the big UN organization that's responsible for disaster risk management, and they've come up with 10 essentials, which are helping us to frame this new ISO standard. We've just signed an MOU with UNISDR, with the United Nations Environment Program, And we are working on the SDGs. I'm going to New York in a few days to actually for that vote that was referred to in the opening discussion. The SDGs, the urban goal 11 has one very important target within it on resilient cities. For the first time, cities are actually mentioned in this set of goals internationally. So we have an incredible opportunity here. The stars are aligning at all levels. So I think within Toronto, and this is my last question, isn't it?
Yep.
So I have to say, I'm going to put out a call. This is for your tweeting. I'm going to put out a call right here, a call to action, because I know globally what's happening around this resilience in cities and the risks and the investments and the need for data. And I think if our provincial government can talk about an Ontario pension plan vis-a-vis our federal government, why not a resilience fund for cities? Let's set up a call to action tonight to set up a resilience fund. If the cost of one storm is 70 million plus, maybe $1 billion, I heard tonight, but 700 million or 70 million, you said was the, and I was reading David's report. It's the climate change risk management policy. The price tag on that budget is 1.3 million. We're talking 700 trillions of dollars of infrastructure. So how about a little resilience fund from multiple levels of government in this country for cities?
Yeah. Patricia. So our last question, before we go into closing remarks, so each of our panelists will have a final chance before we open it up to the audience. It's for Lucy. Lucy, what are the ways that creating community resilience hubs also reduces greenhouse gas emissions?
We see a very strong connection between resilience and greenhouse gas reductions. And I think the most obvious example is with our buildings. As part of this pilot project, we did a building capacity assessment at each of the sites. And the two fundamental principles are stormwater management and lowering the energy footprint of the building. So resilient buildings are green buildings. So we really see resiliency as being an important way in to build awareness around climate mitigation and greenhouse gas reductions. We also see that, you know, the idea of hubs is a wonderful way to think about modeling low carbon consumption across a range of issues. So you could have a local hub that's modeling active transportation, senior ride shares, shared bike hubs, electric plug-in stations. You could have local hubs that are modeling local sustainable food systems. When I think of faith communities and the big kitchens that they often have, and the community gardens, and so the limit is our imagination on this. So there's a lot of overlap and a lot to build on. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. So we have a couple minutes for closing remarks before we open it up to the audience. And why don't we start with Grant, and we can just work our way down back to Lucy.
Okay.
1 minute per panel.
Excellent. Thanks,
Great.
Robin. So first I'd like to thank Robin as moderator, my fellow participants. You come to these things and you always learn some things you never knew, and so I definitely have some follow-up to do, lots of notes. The audience, certainly this is great. I mean, you could be watching the debate, and I'm certainly happy to answer questions and remain in chat for a bit afterwards. So one of the things I was thinking about, in terms of big ideas, at the start you saw our logo, and I really think what we have here is something a little more akin to the logo we had up there. Like our logo is these 4 stylized buildings, there it is, that reach up into the sky, and they're built on pretty deep foundations, needless to say. I mean, I think First Canadian Place has about 5 basement levels. And they're built with an eye towards, they have to work every day. I mean, really what they're all about is they have to execute flawlessly in terms of, thousands of people working those buildings, and they're built towards that. So I really think what we have here is we have a discussion about a number of big ideas, broken into more bite-sized chunks, plan, and to Patricia's point, measured, like measured, and then assessed every step of the way. If we can take this sort of mindset to this problem together, we're going to ensure that Toronto remains one of the best places in the world to live. Thank you.
I didn't know I was going to have another chance. resilience. So I'm going to save my call to action. Listen, I completely agree with this. What was just said, the need for data and metrics to support our mayor, to support our city management team to build a really important resilient city by 2050. You can't underline the need for data any more than I have. And I think that Toronto's already leading the world in this data and performance management anyway. So let's step up and demonstrate to the rest of the cities in Ontario and Canada how important this goal is for a resilient Toronto. Thank you.
So I'll just say a couple of things. Just based on our experience down at the Brickworks, where we had the foolishness to create a community center in a floodplain, and I mentioned we had 3 catastrophic floods. You know, when we worked with the Conservation Authority, they said, you know, 1 in 10 year, 1 in 100. We created a site that can absorb the flooding. The water comes in and the water goes out, and that's critical. We took out storm sewers and we put in swales and stormwater ponds. We have green roofs. So even though we've had these floods, we've really been able to minimize the damage because of how we designed the space. But we weren't ready. The first flood we had stuff all over the ground and our back end of our emergency response. You know, we didn't really know how to handle it. You don't often know how to handle these things until you go through it. So the first flood was $1.5 million in damage. So it was $100 million in the big flood, $100 million. We were 1.5 million. And so we weren't ready, and it cost a lot of money. We went through insurance. We got, you know, we got kind of hosed by the contractors. By the time the third flood came along, we were so ready, we were so coordinated, we were so efficient, and we were able to manage so much of it ourselves that we brought the cost down to $50,000. So it's just kind of that preparedness thing. You know, if you're ready for it, it's still going to happen, but you can certainly help to mitigate that because we built resiliency into our own operations and coordination and communication and preparedness. I tried to slip 2 slides in, but they'd only let me slip 1 in. And it's a comic, and it's like some guy on a podium, and he's saying, who wants change? And the audience is screaming, you know, we do. And then the next little picture down is like, who wants to change? And everybody sort of had their head down. And so I think that's a lot about what I'm talking about, a resiliency process, is that it is about how we work together, it's about how we communicate, it's about how we create collective action. And so I think we got a lot of studies. I think we have wonderful data, and we are in one of the best regions in the world, and it's really about how we harness that so we don't lose it.
So I guess the point I'd like to end on is just to say, it's not, when we're talking about resilience, it's not either or. It's not should we focus on hard infrastructure or should we focus on community-based resilience. It's both. And I really believe that Toronto as a city will be judged, when we will judge ourselves by how well we care for our most vulnerable. And so let's not miss this opportunity that this crisis presents, this climate crisis presents to us. To paraphrase Naomi Klein, the climate crisis changes everything. So let's not miss this opportunity to break down the silos and build up community bonds. Let's move the ownership of resilience to the neighborhood level as part of our plan. And we know we can't prevent or predict these extreme weather events, but we can work together to support each other to build a greener, more resilient city. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy.